Hey friends, I want to share this Truth Matters with you. And what I've chosen for this episode is usually one of the most, asked questions and one of the most difficult questions that I get throughout my ministry. And that is, if God is so good, why is there evil and suffering in the world? And of course, the lower capacity of our human brains to understand the work of God, we miss a lot of times the answers that God is giving to us in these dynamics. You know, every one of us eventually will wrestle with that question and other questions. You know, we'll ask it in hospital rooms. We'll ask it at gravesides of loved ones and friends. We'll ask it after a betrayal, a heartbreak, abuse, addiction, anxiety, tragedy, or loss. And often underneath that question is another fear. Did God intend this for you? Is this something that you're being paid back? Is it something because of an ancestor going wrong? I remember when I came out about my HIV status, I had friends that said, wow, some people must have done some really bad things in your family's past for you to deal with this burden. And I didn't see that at all in terms of my life. The way I see this is that this is the result, my illness is the result of a broken world. And therefore, it explains and has a lot to do with the answer to the question, if God is so good, then how can suffering and evil exist? The Christian faith answers that question and the question we asked earlier very clearly, but it answers it carefully. It says that God did not create the world broken. You know, in Genesis, creation begins in harmony and humanity lived in perfect relationship with God, with one another, and with creation itself. There was no death, no shame, no violence, no disease, no fear. You know, Augustine once wrote, God judged it better to bring good out of evil than to permit evil to exist. And therefore, he lets evil exist, but he wants to continuously pull the good out of that evil. That is the work that he's doing to show not only his authority and power, but our place in his love. Augustine understood that evil itself was not created by God. Evil was the corruption of what God had originally created very good, he said, in Genesis. The early church fathers often described evil not as a created thing, but as the absence or distortion of God's intended goodness. You know, like darkness is the absence of light, that kind of thing. But then came what Scripture calls the fall. Humanity rebelled against God, and when sin entered the world, suffering entered into it as well. But the fall was not merely spiritual. All creation fell. Spiritually, humanity became separated from God. Emotionally, fear, shame, anxiety, despair, insecurity entered our human experience. Relationally, blame and betrayal and hatred and abuse and division and violence appeared. Physically, disease, pain, aging, and death became realities. And even nature itself was affected. Storms, disasters, famine, decay, and disorder became part of creation's experience. The Apostle Paul writes in Romans 8 that creation itself is groaning under this brokenness. I love theologian N.T. Wright. He says the point of the biblical story is that creation is good but corrupted. That distinction matters deeply. Disease was not God's original design. Death was not God's intention. Mental illness, abuse, divorce, betrayal, violence, and destruction are not celebrations of God's will. They are, though, the signs of that creation is fractured. John Wesley, you know, the father of our theological bent, once described sin as having overspread the earth as a flood. Think about that. Touching every dimension of life. The fall damaged not only souls, but systems, relationships, bodies, and even creation itself. That helps us understand the difference between pain and evil. Pain is the experience of suffering in a broken world. Evil is the corruption and rebellion that distorts what God intended for good. Some suffering comes from human choices, absolutely. Some come from the brokenness of nature, absolutely. And some come from wounds we did not choose and cannot explain, absolutely. And much of it comes from the adversary pushing back on us, absolutely. But Christianity teaches something extraordinary. God does not abandon creation in its suffering and brokenness. Instead, he does something that is completely out of whack for all of the other gods and religions. God enters into that brokenness. And this is the heart and life of Jesus Christ. In Jesus, God steps directly into the pain of the world he came to redeem. Jesus experienced exhaustion like we do. He experienced grief like we do. He experienced rejection. He experienced betrayal. He experienced physical agony. The prophet Isaiah says of the coming Christ, he was a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. Isaiah knew through the Spirit of God that the Messiah would come to the earth, and he would become incarnated into the same struggles that every other human being goes through. Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote during the darkness of Nazi Germany that only the suffering God can help, because he understands what we're going through. Christianity is unique because our God does not stand far away from suffering. He steps into the middle of it. On the cross, God himself entered human pain. And then on the cross tells us something that, God would rather suffer for humanity than abandon it. Think about that. God would rather suffer for you than abandon it. He'd rather suffer for us in the world than abandon it. C.S. Lewis wrote in The Problem of Pain, God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. Pain is not proof that God has abandoned us. Often it is the place where we become most aware of our need for him. Yet the cross is not only about suffering, it is about redemption. Tolkien, one of my favorite writers, described the gospel as the great eucatastrophe, the sudden turning of tragedy toward hope. I love that. The resurrection reminds us that evil does not ultimately win, death does not ultimately win, brokenness does not ultimately win, but redemption does. One day God promises a restored creation where there will be no more mourning, crying, pain, or death. Until then, we live between Eden lost and redemption completed. Think about that. And in that space, God is with us. Sometimes God rescues us from suffering. Sometimes he strengthens us through suffering, but he never wastes suffering. And I want you to understand. So when we ask, where is God in our suffering? Where is God in your suffering? The Christian answer is this. First, he's not absent. He is present. He is redeeming. And through Christ, he is making even these tragic, difficult things new. Friends, I love you. Truth does matter. You matter. Go into the world and be a disciple of Jesus. Salt and light. God bless you.